things every manager needs to know, but almost no one ever tells you. But in this video, I'm breaking down 7 of them. I'm Ashley Hurd. I'm the founder of Manager Method, a leadership development platform, and I give tips for managers at all levels to lead and also team members to succeed at work. Before I started Manager Method, I was an employment lawyer. I also worked in HR and as a manager, and so I've used all of those experiences to give these really practical tips. And a couple of years ago, I made a video on 9 things that managers need to know. And those were really focused around people leadership topics. Things like how you say something can matter even more than what you say sometimes, or that your best employees even will make a mistake. And so preparing from that lens, rather than being caught off guard after the fact. And I'll add that video here in case you haven't seen it. But this video is more focused on legal topics, because especially as a lawyer, I saw things like misconceptions at work, or that managers that didn't know certain things and had no idea. And this isn't legal advice. It's important to say that, and if you wonder why do lawyers always say that, it's because we really have to, and it's important that nobody on social media can actually give legal advice. But with that caveat, this is general information that can be helpful to know. And the first is, it's really important to know what applies, because you really may have no idea. If you're a manager, especially if you have people in different locations, maybe that's different cities, states if you're within the same country, and certainly countries if you manage a global team, it can be wild how many different laws can apply. I'm based out of Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia. And here, state-wise, we don't have that many protections. But look at somewhere like California, Colorado, New York within the US. They can have all sorts of different laws, including city-specific laws and things that can come into play. And again, if you manage a global team, I've worked in organizations with over 80 countries and seen how very different the laws are, especially in virtually every country outside of the US. And it can be hard because as a manager, you're not a wizard. And so you're not going to know everything. And you may think, well, my HR should know everything, or my employment lawyers. But even they have to learn things. But one thing that can be really important as a manager is to make sure that wherever you have team members, you talk to HR to say, what are the things I should know? Especially if you have people like breaks or overtime, or if an employee resigns and there's a notice period, all sorts of things can apply. And so just asking that question proactively as a manager can be really helpful for you not to get caught off guard by things after the fact. Now, the second is focused. This is really a US concept of right to work versus at will. Now, a lot of times I hear people talk about right to work, and they're like, well, we can let someone go in any time about right to work. But when people say right to work, what they generally mean is at will. Because right to work is actually, people often use it meaning at will, but right to work is about an idea of if you're in a union environment in the US, and it's generally state by state, if someone's a member of a union organized group, if they have to join the union or if they can opt out of it. And that's really what right to work means. At will is the idea of if someone doesn't have an employment contract for a set period of time, then either you can let them go at any time or they can resign at any time. Even if you'd like 2 weeks notice, often people may have the legal right to do that. And so that's what at will can mean. Now, third is the idea of at will, which can be a very different concept to people globally, where often you do have notice periods. If an employee gives notice or an employer lets someone go, on either side, there's often baked in protections. Those rarely come into play in the US, especially with the idea of at-will employment. But sometimes people think at will in that, okay, you can just let someone go and there's no consequences. But combining a bit, number one, with different laws that can apply, and number two, this idea of at-will employment, is even in at-will employment, that's not a magic cloak that prohibits other laws from applying. Even in at-will, there can be things like if your organization is of a certain size or things like that, and different laws can apply, but things like discrimination on the basis of gender, age, pregnancy, disability status, veteran status, so many different things that can come into play. And that can be, again, federal, state, local laws, depending on what can apply. And so some people really, they do think, because they've never learned otherwise, but the idea of at will doesn't replace all the other laws that can apply. And so it's important to know, especially if you're letting someone go from employment, that you're aware and you're talking to your internal team to be aware of any considerations, because you never want to discriminate against anyone, but sometimes managers don't realize that laws can still apply, even in at will. Fourth is that your words really matter. As a manager, depending on what's happening, at times you can be looked at as a manager, meaning a representative of the organization. And so even if at times you feel like you're joking around, some of the comments you make can end up in a claim, like a charge to the EEOC, which is the federal agency for making things like discrimination claims. Different states or even cities can have their own EEOC offices. But often managers' words can come back, whether that's words verbally or things in email or text messages. Those things can come into play more than some managers realize. And knowing as well, sometimes you may say, okay, but I was joking. But context matters, and sometimes things don't come across as you certainly believe they are, or you may think, well, so no one should get offended by that. But oftentimes when I've seen things like lawsuits, frequently there's different quotes in there from managers. And so even if you're saying something and thinking, oh, like I was just saying that off the cuff, it's amazing how you can end up in a deposition talking about things that you'd forgotten you'd said from years ago. And so just being really mindful of your words is especially important as a manager. Again, as you saw from the 9 Things video, your leadership and how you motivate your team can matter a lot to how results happen, but also the environment you create. You often set up not just what's allowed, but what's permitted as well, and so being especially mindful. 5th is that you can be responsible. And it's not just a matter of your words and actions and how much weight they carry, but also individual liability can come into play and something to be especially mindful of. And this is globally. There can be laws in the US that have this, and other countries around the world, or even regions of the world, can have certain specifications where managers can actually be held liable. In the US, for example, that can be things like the Fair Labor Standards Act, the wage and hour law federally, where if a manager has certain operational control. At times, I've seen lawsuits against managers for things like torts, meaning someone saying like, oh, you interfered with my employment, like if you gave someone a bad reference that was false, for example, or other things like that. I've seen where individual managers can come into play. And this isn't a matter of, okay, you don't become a manager because you're just setting up to get sued, because the role of a manager is so important in what you can drive from a business results and the impact of your employees' careers. But sometimes people make these comments or do things and you're not realizing that really they can have ramifications personally. 6 is how you manage can impact your bottom line. And this isn't just a factor of what I talk about a lot of how people are treated at work impacts things like how they care about their job, how they perform, how long they want to stay, all of those things that directly go to business results. And those things matter. Because sometimes as a manager, you are squarely focused on that. Okay, this is my job, this is my livelihood, I want to look good to my own leaders, and that's really human. And the impact you have on your team impacts a lot how those results get done and whether you have a team that stays and grows or you have a lot of turnover or disengagement. But also it can impact your bottom line even in other ways. Because depending on your organization, sometimes things like legal costs, so outside counsel fees, or if you have judgments or things like that, that can impact your specific budget. And so if you have a P&L, a budget you're responsible for, you may not realize that those type of fees can eat into all of your budgetary things. Again, a lot of what I talk about is how important it is to treat people like humans, from the impact that you have on people's lives and their careers and those business results. But sometimes managers do get squarely focused on those business results. And so it's important to remember that in the end, if you get caught up in things like a lawsuit, that can actually impact your bottom line. And so if that's primarily what you've been thinking about, just pausing to recognize that when you treat people in a way that drives their careers and builds them up and has those conversations, even the ones that you've been putting off because they're difficult, that can also not only help you drive results, but also save those costs that nobody wants on the bottom line. 7th is something I actually said in the 9 Things video, which is this idea of just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I'll say that here is, depending on where you are, like I mentioned, I'm in Georgia, and so we may not always have as many employment laws come into play, but we do still have plenty, including on the federal level. But no matter where you are, one thing I've seen is things like litigation, which rarely tends to be anything other than a really painful, exhausting process for everyone involved, everybody on both sides. But there are times where cases, if they're the rare cases that end up in front of a jury, the things that, even at the end of the day, you may think, okay, well, I disagree, that shouldn't have been illegal. What can really sway people is the way conversations were had. So you may have sent an email or replied to an email, and you may have had a bad day or been frustrated, and you fire off a response that as you look at it, you think, okay, well, I wouldn't have sent that. That can end up being an exhibit blown up in front of the whole jury or brought into the court for a motion. And so just knowing, regardless of the legality of things, when you think and pause to think about the words that you say and the actions that you take. Again, legality aside, whether you're in a location or you have a team member that's in a location with a ton of different laws and you're like, I have no idea what to do, or you're one where you're like, not that much applies and they're at will, either way, the way that you work with that team member and thinking about the ramifications, yes, there absolutely can be legal ramifications that are really important to know. But again, those business ramifications or how that person feels about themselves, all of those things at the end of the day, that's what you have a lot more control on that sometimes you realize as a manager. If these tips are helpful, then make sure you follow along. I never say like and subscribe, so I'll say that because it's very helpful to get these videos out to other people so they can see them. But just knowing, I know all too well that when you become a manager, frequently you were promoted because you did a good job at a job. But all of a sudden you're a manager trying to coach and teach other people and now deal with the people situations, and it can feel really overwhelming. That's why I left my corporate work to start a business, helping management be easier, helping you have ideas of what to do and say, or these tips like pausing and considering before you act. And just knowing, if this is helpful, then again, please do keep following along. If you're an individual manager looking for more resources, I have more, I'll add those below. Or from an organization standpoint, a lot of what we do at Manager Method and our whole team is to have really scalable leadership development and development for individual contributors as well. So you can roll it out and help to bring some of those things that you may think are common sense, but actually make those more common and not only have the content to go through at their own pace, but also everything you need to run internal cohorts, whether small or large, to really bring these to life and have ripple effects across your organization.